The Jets coaching staff is under fire, but no playbook can cure inexperience. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our episode today is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, the Jets coaching staff has received a lot of criticism from the team's 0-5 start. Today, we're going to break down what's going on with the coaching staff. We're going to talk about where they need to take the team over the final 12 games of the season. We'll talk about the things that they are not doing well, but we're also going to talk about some of the reasons they might be getting a little bit too much criticism. And that's where we'll start. And when I say that the coaching staff's getting a little bit too much criticism, that does not mean they're doing a good job. And that does not mean they deserve no criticism. They deserve quite a bit of criticism. And I've given it to them. And I think it's fair to criticize this coaching staff because the performance to date, I think, has been unacceptable. And I understand that this is a rebuilding team. I understand that this is year one of a new regime. But I think it's fair to expect more from this team than we've gotten. I think there are some key areas that this coaching staff is failing, and we'll get to them in a bit. At the same time, I think we need to acknowledge where the New York Jets are as a football team. And I know you can throw the words rebuilding out there. And quite frankly, with the Jets, the word rebuilding has kind of lost all meaning because we've kind of been like in a perpetual rebuild for the last decade and a half. And I think a lot of Jets coaching staffs and a lot of Jets front offices during that stretch have kind of used rebuilding as a blanket excuse for the team losing. And sometimes a team's legitimately in a rebuild. And sometimes that explains poor performance. But I think the Jets have kind of used it as an excuse in situations where they should not have, in situations where they were trying to escape blame for people not doing their jobs effectively. In this situation, I think we have to find nuance. I think that there is a middle ground. I think that there is an appropriate amount you can blame the coaching staff. It doesn't mean that they're responsible for everything. It doesn't mean that they are immune from criticism. I think there's one key area, though, where maybe we don't appreciate that this is how much this area is contributing to the Jets' struggles. Because we talk about an undisciplined football team, we talk about a team that does not play smart, and to be honest with you, both of those are legitimate criticisms in general. But I think that we have kind of ignored how young this team is right now, and this is a stark departure from where the Jets were a year ago. Last year, the Jets were loading up with veterans around Aaron Rodgers because they mistakenly thought they had a team that could make a Super Bowl run. This year, well, the Jets kind of have to pay the bill for that. The Jets borrowed a lot of assets from 2025 to load up in 2023 and 2024. That means they did not have the resources to build a full team this year. And they're also starting over. A lot of guys who were on the team last year are gone. And it was very difficult without a lot of resources to build this team this offseason, which means the Jets are leaning on a lot of really young players. I mean, how many young players are the Jets leaning on? I actually looked this up yesterday, and I wrote an article on GangGreenNation.com about it. Let me give you the players on the Jets who are seeing an appreciable snap share. On Sunday, Armand Membou, the first-round pick, played 100% of the snaps on offense. Mason Taylor, the second-round pick, 84%. Arian Smith, the fourth-round pick, 56%. Kiko Mauignoa, late-round pick at linebacker, 83%. Tyler Barron, late-round pick at defensive end, 42%. Malachi Moore, fourth-round pick at safety, 38%. Those are 6 rookies who are seeing appreciable snap shares with the Jets. And we could go deeper than that. Second-year players, Olu Fashanu, 91% of the snaps. Isaiah Davis, 40% of the snaps. On defense, Braden McGregor, 47% of the snaps. Juwan Briggs, 42%. Now, I know Briggs wasn't the player the Jets actually drafted, but he's still a second-year player. That's 10 players, either in year one or year two, who are seeing appreciable snap shares for the Jets. And this isn't like 2022, where you had an extra first-round pick and an extra second-round pick, and it made sense to have a lot of young players in the lineup. And it's not like this is a team that's just super young. And they're playing a lot of guys who were late round picks. And part of this is they just don't have better options. Part of it's they're dealing with injuries. If Jermaine Johnson's here, if Quincy Williams is here, maybe Kiko Mauignoa and Tyler Barron aren't seeing as big of a snap share. But, a big part of this is that the Jets just have to rely on a lot more young players than your typical team. Now, you might be wondering, is relying on 10 young players a lot? Well, I looked up what the Jets did last year. And last year, and I know it's not exactly apples to apples to compare one game with a full season, but last year, the Jets had one player who was a rookie who got at least 1/3 of the snaps. That was Olu Fashanu, and only 2 second-year guys, Will McDonald and Joe Tippmann. And those were all high-round picks. When you're talking about low-round picks, you're talking about guys who need work, guys who typically would not be seeing big snap shares. On a normal team, these guys would be trying to develop on the practice field. And if we're going to be perfectly honest, when we're talking about the late round picks, and I'm not talking Armand Membou, the expectations Armand Membou develops into a good starter. And he's off to, I thought Sunday was a bit of a rough game for Membou, but you have to be happy with where Membou is. I would say Membou is ahead of schedule right now, 5 weeks into his career. I was not expecting him to play at this level at this point of his career. You have to be happy with him. Olu Fashanu is another guy you're hoping will develop into a starter. For being honest, Olu's been kind of disappointing this year. He had the one good game last week against Miami, kind of took a step back this week. Mason Taylor, you're hoping he develops into a starter. But other than that, I mean, the other guys the Jets are giving big snaps to right now, I don't know how many of them are actually going to be contributors going forward. I don't think you can expect big things from most of these guys. I think at this point, it might be just a philosophical thing where Aaron Glenn knows that the season's going nowhere anyway. So we're just going to throw as many young players on the field, get them as many reps as possible, and we'll see who develops. And I think when you're talking about a lot of these guys, particularly the mid to late round picks, the Jets don't really have a lot of faith that these guys are going to develop into starters. I think the hope is that with these game reps, maybe they can develop into useful contributors down the line. Maybe somebody surprises you. Maybe there's a guy you're from this group of the day 3 picks. Maybe there's like 1 or 2 guys who, you're not expecting to develop into starters, but they just take these reps and run with them, and they end up, developing into starting level players. I think that's the hope. I think realistically, a lot of these guys are not going to be part of the Jets going forward, but it's an opportunity for them to get on the field. In the NFL, it's very difficult to develop players using game reps. Game reps are the best way to develop players, but you have to balance the player development with winning games. For most teams, winning games takes priority. So players you're trying to develop have to develop on the practice field. You don't get the opportunity to put them into games, because you put them into games, they're going to really struggle. They're going to cost you games. With the Jets, the season's going nowhere anyway. The team's 0-5. So player development has taken on a higher priority. And with player development, though, with the what the Jets are doing, you're going to see a lot of mistakes, because first of all, these guys aren't that talented. Second of all, these guys don't really know what they're doing. And I do think there's a bit of a disconnect, because one thing I hear from Jets fans a lot is, well, just play the young players. I don't care if they make mistakes. Let's let them go out there and learn. And to be honest with you, for where the New York Jets are as a team right now, I think that that's a very valid approach. However, when these players make mistakes, we're ranting about what an undisciplined football team this is. And I think in some ways it's a little unfair. And I put myself in that number. Look, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. So I think that, when we criticize the coaching staff, we have to keep this in mind. We have to keep in mind that this is a really young team. The Jets are rolling with a lot of young, inexperienced players, guys who don't know what they're doing. And there's a lot of low-level prospects on the field for the Jets right now. This is not, when I mentioned that the Jets have 10 rookies and second-year players who are seeing appreciable snaps, well, only 3 of them were first or second round picks. So that means that you're going to have issues on the field. And that contributes a lot to the lack of discipline. It contributes a lot to the bad mistakes you're seeing on the field. And, it contributes to the overall poor level of play. But I don't think the coaching staff can be completely absolved. Again, we're finding the balance here. I don't think you can say the coaching staff's responsible for everything. I don't think you can say they're responsible for nothing. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about areas where the coaching staff is not doing the job right now. And there are a number which are holding this team back. Let's discuss as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What you gotta love is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot, you can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. It kicks in and it's sugar-free, so you don't have to worry about crashing later. The flavors are great. They're refreshing. They give you a quick lift before a busy day. Any of the flavors are perfect to try next. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love, or be bold and try something new in-store and online at 5hourenergy.com. It's number 5, HOURENERGY.com, or Amazon today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're talking Jets coaching, where it's failing, where maybe they're getting a little bit too much blame, and what they need to do moving forward. Now, in the first segment, I don't want you to come away thinking that I'm making excuses for the Jets coaching staff, because I'm not. What I'm trying to do is find the right balance. What can we truly blame on the coaching staff? And what are the areas that aren't really their fault? So we've given you one big reason why maybe the Jets coaching staff's getting a little bit too much grief. But I don't think it's fair to say that this coaching staff can be absolved for all the team's issues, because I see a number of things happening on the field right now, which are really troubling. And, as I mentioned yesterday, that Dallas game was the first time I felt like the odds were above zero that Aaron Glenn would be one and done with the Jets. I dismissed the idea through the first 4 games that it was even plausible. I think that it's not likely. I think that if it was to happen, you would have to see the Jets play at the level they've played the first 5 weeks through the full season. You'd have to see this team not improve at all. And I think the odds are decent that you're going to see improvement through the full season. But what's happening on the field cuts beyond a lack of talent. Now, I think the youth the Jets are playing contributes to it. And I think maybe we haven't appreciated the extent to which the Jets are relying on young players and the impact those playing so many young guys has on a team. And I think for where the Jets are right now, playing the young guys makes a lot of sense. But you can't blame it all on the young guys, because, when you miss 10 tackles in the first half of Sunday's game, it wasn't all young guys missing tackles. Yeah, Tyler Barron missed a couple tackles in the first half, including a big one on a big Javonte Williams run. But Tyler Barron's not the only one making mistakes. Isaiah Oliver also missed a couple tackles. I mean, that's a veteran guy. That's a guy that they targeted specifically. That's a guy they brought in. On the big Javonte Williams run, Andre Sisco took a horrible angle. Again, that's another guy they brought in. And I think that, if we get on the coaching staff, really the first area I'd look is nobody they brought in this offseason has looked good. And again, I want to be careful with, criticizing the late round picks, because these are late round picks. I'm trying to find the balance of why is nobody from the late round contributing? I've gone a couple times, maybe I've gone a little overboard by saying, these late round picks aren't contributing. What I'm looking for is something from this regime that gives me confidence in them moving forward. And that could be like a late round pick breaking out. We haven't seen any of the late round guys break out yet. I want one, that's what I'm asking for. But I want to focus less on the late round picks and more on just the veterans the Jets have brought in, because none of them have panned out. And we know Justin Fields is not doing a good job, but look at the guys on the defense. Brandon Stevens has been awful. Andre Sisco has not done a good job, and that was one I liked, but it really hasn't worked out. I think that this is clearly a coaching staff that has a lot of control over personnel. And outside of Armand Membou, who was a top 10 pick, and look, you give credit for hitting in the top 10 and through 5 games at least. It's too early to anoint Membou the next great tackle in the league. Through 5 games, Membou looks really good. But there's nobody else they brought in. And let's focus specifically on the pro personnel side, because Brandon Stevens, when the Jets gave him that contract, that was a huge question mark at the time. That was like a head scratching contract. And there's been nothing that suggested that this was a good move. And we got beat again on a long catch that was a key play in the first half of that game against Dallas. And Sisco has been taking bad angles left and right. I've been disappointed because I watched some of his Jacksonville film, particularly 2022, 2023. It looked good. 2024 did not look good. Unfortunately, the Jets have gotten the 2024 version of Sisco. My hope was that Jacksonville was such a mess last year that maybe that dragged him down a bit. Unfortunately, the Jets are also a mess this year. So, Cisco's not playing very well. And this just speaks to like a lack of overall cohesion on the defense. Guys just not executing the basics. And I think some of this goes with the scheme has not been implemented. The scheme has not been taught in a way that guys understand that. And you might, I know I've said this a lot. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me say that there's just like a lack of cohesion, that guys don't really understand the scheme. You may be wondering like what I mean by that. And there's no one way to articulate it, but I mean, there are just plays where I watch where maybe a guy's like kind of like creeping up from the slot and he looks like he's going to blitz, then he backs out, then he's not really sure where to drop into coverage. That's like one of those keys that I see. Another thing that I see frequently is the Jets busting coverages because they don't switch receivers. Sometimes in coverage, if the guy I'm covering, if I'm positioned pre-snap in a spot that makes it very difficult to get to the guy I'm covering, I may switch with somebody else. It's kind of like, I don't know if you follow basketball, but sometimes in basketball, if like there's a pick and roll, you switch. Essentially, I take your guy, you take my guy, because I'm in better position to get your guy. You're in better position to get my guy. I've seen a lot of times this year, and this is true in zone. It's true in man coverage, where the Jets are not communicating effectively, where they're not, where like one guy's switching, the other guy's not, which means the receiver runs free. I take your guy, but you stay on your guy. You don't take my guy. So now a receiver's running wide open. And they're not like calling out when there's a pick play on. There's not, sometimes, especially in man coverage, teams will run what are known as rub routes. And essentially that's like a receiver gets in the way of one defender, so another receiver runs free. Essentially, your receiver runs into me so that my receiver gets wide open. You have to communicate those. You have to try and figure out a way to stop those things from happening. And these are things that are not happening. And the other thing is, I've never seen a team bite as hard on play action consistently as the Jets do on defense this year. Guys are not reading their keys. Guys are frequently out of position, unable to defend the pass because they're biting so hard on play action. There's a lack of discipline. And I just think overall the scheme is not good. I compared Steve Wilks to like the defense of Nathaniel Hackett. And one of the hallmarks of like the Nathaniel Hackett offense was the lack of modern concepts. Hackett never, the phrase I used was Hackett never puts stress on the defense. And that's, you barely ever saw motions with the Hackett offense. And a motion kind of reshapes the geometry of the offense. So the defensive formation has to change. And the defensive formation has to kind of like shift after a motion on offense. And sometimes defenses mess that up. And that's the type of thing that, that's why you see teams motion a lot, because the defense kind of has to reset, because the space of the field they have to cover changes after a motion, because offensive players are lined in a different spot. And sometimes defenses really make errors with that, and it opens up big plays on offense. And that was like one of the issues I had with Hackett. With Wilks, I mean, the blitzes are so predictable. I mean, I can call them out like watching these games from home. And defenses, I mean, I struggle to think of many times where an offensive was in the wrong protection because Wilks put such a great pre-snap disguise on them. And a lot of the blitzes are poorly designed. A lot of the blitzes come from spots that, are very easy to pick up. A guy has to run a long way to get to the quarterback. So the quarterback can either get rid of the ball, or a blocker can see it and get over in time. There's just a lot on this is particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think on the offensive side of the ball, the coaching's been okay. I mean, I'm not sure Tanner Engstrand is a top 5 coordinator right now, but I at least see concepts that make sense on the offensive side of the ball. Now, the offense is the issues with the offense. The offense commits the dumb play at the worst possible time. And but I don't blame the coaching as much for that. I blame the players, because you're seeing a lot of veteran players make big mistakes. John Simpson committing a penalty against Miami, Breece Hall fumbling the ball away against Dallas. But on the defensive side of the ball, I think the coaching is just really bad. Aaron Glenn gave a full-throated defensive Steve Wilks after Sunday's game, and I don't think that making a change at defensive coordinator right now is going to make a big difference, because I think you run into the same issue you had last year with Jeff Ulbrich. If Wilks gets fired right now, Glenn takes over the defense, then Glenn's probably stretched too thin. And Glenn has enough issues as head coach right now to have to take over as defensive coordinator. But I think something's got to change. Either this performance has to improve, or Wilks needs to go this offseason. And during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what happens before the offseason. There are things that need to change between now and the end of the season for the Jets on this coaching staff. What areas can we look to for improvement with Jets coaches over the final 12 games? Well, we'll discuss as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching the Jets or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. And of course, Jets are heading to London this weekend for a game against the Denver Broncos. It might not be the worst thing for the Jets to get out of the country right now, because there's a lot of negativity in the fan base, and rightly so. We deserve to be upset. Well, the Jets are 7-point underdogs heading into this neutral site game in London. If you want to get in the action, FanDuel's the place to do it. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We are talking today about the job the Jets coaching staff is doing. Lots of fans rightly upset because, we're being honest, this coaching staff has been a disappointment. There was a lot of talk about how coaching would be improved this year with this team, and we just haven't seen it through the first 5 games. In fact, heading into the season, one comment I made frequently was, even if this coaching staff wasn't good, you knew it would be an upgrade over what Jeff Ulbrich did, because the Jets did not really have a full coaching staff for 3/4 of last season, because Ulbrich was stretched so thin between his defensive coordinator and head coach duties. And I have to say, through 5 games, it's the most shocking thing to me is I don't think the coaching's been better. I mean, I think, even though they have a fuller coaching staff, I don't think the quality of the coaching has improved at all. And this has some fans talking about whether Aaron Glenn's going to be one and done. Now, I've said the last 2 days that for the first time, I now actually see a path to that, because we're now past the first month. I don't think you can ever say there's a chance a coach is going to be one and done after like 3 games, unless it's like something like, Urban Meyer, where the meltdown began during the previous offseason. But I think that if Glenn was to be one and done, this would be how it would start. But I think we're a long way from that. And again, I think part of this is the Jets would have to show no improvement between now and the end of the season. One thing you frequently see with first-year coaches is things seem hopeless in the early days. Things just look absolutely miserable. Now, sometimes they don't always look as miserable as this, but there's typically a lot of losing. There's typically a lot of frustration. And there are lots of guys who've gone on to be good coaches in this league who got off to ridiculous starts and looked terrible the first 2 months of their careers, and then things slowly started to improve, and the team started to win games. They started to look more competitive, and suddenly they don't look so bad. And there's always an opportunity to turn things around in this league. And it's not even like the great coaches are the great teams. I mean, you go back 6 years, the Miami Dolphins in 2019, through the first month and a half of the season, they looked like they were going to be the worst team in NFL history. And they ended up not being a very good team. They only won 5 games, but they started to turn things around. And ironically, the turnaround began in a game against the Jets that they won, where they got their first win at 0-7. That was the year Adam Gase took over the Jets. But the Dolphins became a tough out the rest of that season. And if the Jets won 5 games this year, I don't think you could say the season was a success. But from here, if the Jets follow that pathway and they go from being completely uncompetitive to competitive to winning a couple of games along the way, that's not a season that's going to get Aaron Glenn fired. It's for Aaron Glenn to get fired after 1 year, it would have to just be a complete nightmare of the season where nothing looks right. They'd have to continue on the Rich Kotite-esque pace that they've been on. And I don't think that that's really a guarantee. And I'm going to be honest with you, as critical as I've been of Glenn, I think it'd be very difficult for me to get to a place where I'd be good firing him after 1 year. And part of this is the basic question is, who's going to take the job if you fire Glenn? You're removed from firing a coach after 5 games. If you fire another coach after 1 year, you're really not going to get a lot of guys who are going to be interested, at least the credible candidates. I mean, the one thing you have to remember is Glenn was a pretty hot coordinator last year. The only reason the Jets got him is that he was a player here and he loves the Jets. A lot of the hot candidates last year were not interested in the Jets. So I think that you have to try and play this. I think getting rid of Glenn after 1 year would have to be a last resort. But we need to see improvement going forward. And I think a lot of the basics just need to get better. I mean, as we get deeper into the season, players should start getting more comfortable with the system. And if guys like aren't familiar or guys aren't comfortable with what they're doing right now, you kind of have to meet them halfway. On the one hand, the deeper we get into the season, the more they should understand it. The more it should become second nature. I've heard learning a system in the NFL it kind of equates to learning a language. If you've ever learned a new language, the more time you spend with a language, the more comfortable you get. The more you understand the nuances of the language, the more you just it becomes second nature to you, and that should happen. But there are things I think that need to be improved with this defense. I think the coaching staff has to take responsibility for that, particularly Steve Wilks. And I think some of the stuff that the guys aren't getting, some of the areas where there are breakdowns maybe need to be simplified, at least for the time being, until guys get comfortable with them. You kind of have to find the right balance. You don't want a defense that's too simple, because the defense that's too simple is easy for the offense to decipher. But you don't want a defense that's too complex. You're trying to confuse the offense. If your defense gets too complex, sometimes your own players get confused. Sometimes your own players don't know how to execute it. So that's one area I'm looking for. Second, we have to cut down on the mental errors, and part of this will hopefully come with some of the young guys getting more experience, some of the young guys getting more games under their belts. But although a lot of the mistakes have been due to young players and inexperience, not all of them have been. And there's just a general lack of cohesion on this defense right now. When you talk about like the guys biting on play action, when you talk about the lack of communication, that's the stuff that has to be improved. And, when it's system wide, I have to put that on the coaches. It's very difficult to see when a team's struggling where the issues with the players end and where the issues with the coaches begin. So it's a bit of a balance. But one thing I'll say is that when you see issues that are team wide, like the Jets have right now, it's difficult for me not to put it on the coaches. When one player messes up, I think you put it on the player. If everybody else is doing their job and one player is not doing his job, it's very easy to look at this and figure out, okay, that's the player's fault. When everybody's struggling, even guys who have had successful track records in the league, even guys who have done good things in the NFL, not just rookies, even guys who have shown flashes of being high-end players, when even they're responsible, that just shows that to me that the coaching staff is not doing a great job implementing what it wants to do. So these are things that have to improve. And of course, Jets got to win some games here. I mean, I really doubt the Jets are going 0-17 this year. I mean, one thing I will say is I said this in a different way yesterday. Look across the league. There are horrible teams. There are teams with less talent than the Jets. Everybody else has a win right now. And it's a bad thing the Jets don't have a win right now, because as untalented as the Jets may be, they're not as lacking in talent as some of the others. This is not the 32nd ranked roster in the league. They're players who have actually accomplished stuff in this league. The Jets need to start getting some wins. And sometimes I feel like for this Jets team, it's very possible if they get that first win, maybe that takes the pressure off. Maybe that makes everybody relax. It makes everybody take a deep breath, not just in the fan base, but in the locker room. And guys can start gaining confidence. Guys can start playing better. And maybe that'll be the thing that finally turns this thing around. But, when you're 0-5 and you not just 0-5, the way the Jets have gotten to 0-5, the way they've looked, you deserve criticism. I think this coaching staff deserves criticism. I do think that, maybe we're underestimating the role of young players on this team. I think the Jets are making the right move, putting those young players on the field, and you're going to have to live with the mistakes. But not all the mistakes can be excused by youth, and things have got to start getting better going forward. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please a 5-star review. If you enjoy the show and are watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll do our weekly mailbag show. I look forward to answering your questions. Talk to you then.